Welcome to episode 32 of Bits, Bytes and Banter, when today I'm going to be joined by the wonderful Emma Fryer. And we're going to be discussing all things communities, countries, perceptions on data centers. But before we get into the detail, I just wanted Emma and I to have a little chat because often we get too deep and too narrow into these discussions, Emma, without qualifying out why should people listen to you. You've a wonderfully complex long title in CyrusOne, but why should people listen to you as you're going through the numbers?
I think perhaps because people will have perhaps similar views in that I've spent 15 years in the sector now, most of which have been conscious of issues with sector reputation. And I think I was 10 years, I think 10 or 11 years, the sector rep at Tech UK. And that meant that I spent a lot of time defending the sector against I suppose, various brickbats that were thrown at it, many of them unfairly, or so we thought. Um, and actually, this is the first time that we've had evidence in which, now that I'm at CyrusOne, because we've done this research, we've actually got evidence to know whether those brickbats were justified or not, and that's what we're going to run through. So I'm sure everyone is quite keen to know whether, what all the sort of things we've read in the press about data centers are whether they're true or not, whether they're based on actual public opinion or perceived public opinion. So yes.
And for those not overly familiar with Tech UK, because we've a wide international audience, what is Tech UK in very briefly?
So Tech UK is a broad-based national trade association for digital technologies, and I used to run the data center program. So I sat between the data center industry in the UK and external stakeholders like media, government. So yeah, should have explained that before, Garry. Sorry.
And obviously, CyrusOne is a big real estate investment trust, multi-country, multi this, that, and the other. And you're not in there that long, you're not.
No, so I'm new at CyrusOne, joined this year, and actually this piece of work was started before I joined, but I immediately saw the value in terms of the public policy dialogue. So I rode shotgun on it immediately. And yes, CyrusOne is, I think, a large co-location developer and operator. Most of our sites are in the US, but we've got a lot of sites across Europe as well.
Okay,
so I'm looking after the European public policy dialogue.
Excellent. So without further ado, as we used to say in blankety, was it blankety blank? What did the survey say? Off you go.
Right, I think I'm sharing screen already, so let me check that this, right. Okay, so I just want to start with the methodology for the piece of work that's been done. It was statistically robust. We wanted to explore public perception of data centers in the European markets where we have operations. So obviously, it's self-interested to that extent. Those that we're in 7 markets in Europe. And we've asked, this was a survey of opinions and perceptions among the general public. So it wasn't specifically targeted at people within data center clusters. We wanted to understand general perceptions. We interviewed over 13,000 people in the 7 countries, and that was done by a third party, an independent research company, very well reputed. And that was done April, May this year. And since then, we've been looking at the outcomes. So that's the sort of bones of it. Feel free to interrupt me at any point, Garry, if I'm not making myself clear. And then just to talk about the report that we've published, we've made that public. I think it's very important to share this kind of information. The report takes on a fairly obvious narrative. Why do we think public perception matters? Do people understand data centers? I'll give you 3 guesses as to what the answer to that was. What are the community benefits people associate with data centers? And also, on the other hand, what worries people about data centers? Are people willing to have data centers in their community? Do people like data centers? Do they view them positively? And then what would make people more willing to host data centers or be more positive about them? And then, what are the implications for the sector? So I think pretty straightforward.
I guess one thing to say to listeners is don't scribble too many notes because we are going to share a link at the end of the session to the full report. So we'll do that at the end.
And then I said, why does public perception of data center matter? I've gone forward. I should have gone back. But anyway, why does it matter? It matters to us particularly because I've gone forward. I've got to go back too, I think. There we are. Why does it matter? Why does it matter to us? Garry said, mind your thumbs, and I've not minded them. It matters to us because we know this sector is important. We know it underpins the daily lives of everybody, everybody in the world. We know that it underpins our economies, and we know that our development faces multiple challenges that are exacerbated by misunderstandings, really. But actually, we wanted to know what other people thought. So that's really what this is about.
So
Now,
the we that you mentioned there 3 times, who is that we?
us within the sector,
Okay, very
we,
important.
yes. But what does everybody else think? That's really what we needed to know. So here we go. Key findings. This is across Europe. These are sort of average findings across Europe. Well, funnily enough, public perception is better than media coverage would have us believe. But public understanding is very patchy, and actually only a minority of people make the connection between their online activities, the things they use their phones for all the time, and data centers. Interestingly, the benefits of data centers are more apparent to those living near them. That was a surprise. But on the other hand, so are some of the drawbacks. Primary concerns, no surprises, high energy use. Visual aesthetics and e-waste were more surprising compared to, say, land use. And attitudes vary significantly, both between and within markets. So that was interesting too, just the variation. And that indicates that when we think about, community development initiatives, we've got to be very bespoke. And a slim majority of people view data centers positively. But if you actually add the people who are neutral about them, that's 93% and only 7% are negative. We'll talk about Ireland within that mix in a minute. The attitudes improve if developers support local economies, provide public amenities, operate sustainably. Don't think there's rocket science in that. And then actually a surprising number, 2/3, are willing to live near a data center to host one in their community. And that willingness increases with material community dividends, again, economic growth, jobs and training. So I think there's nothing that should really surprise us in that, except perhaps some of the variations. And then we looked at Ireland within this as one of our markets. And Ireland is one of the countries where people are most likely to define a data center correctly. It's only 60% though, which means 4 out of 10 didn't manage to choose the right definition. They're also among the most likely to connect the digital services they use to data centers. And I think that makes sense. And Garry, you can probably comment on that, why it would do, because it's a very obvious presence. Data centers have a very obvious presence in Ireland. And then they're just about more positive than, so there's 50% of people are positive about data centers in Ireland, but only 12% negative, 38% being neutral. And people in Ireland are above average in terms of the fact they recognise benefits data centers bring, but they are more worried about energy use, land use, and e-waste than people in other countries, or many other countries. They're generally willing to have data centers in a local area, and they would feel more positive if those data centers increase local employment, training, economic growth. So again, no rocket science there, but some interesting variants. And I think it's worth us. Sorry, Garry.
Again, for people, all of this is included with backup, etc., in the report. You'll get a full link to full copy.
Yeah, and I've simplified some of the charts that we'll look at. This one is a standard, is a pretty standard chart that you'll see in the report, and you can see how we've cut this data. I think that's quite important because we've done it across Europe. So we've got a European average for everything, and then we've cut it by country, and we've also cut it within country on a basis of age demographics, and then we've also cut it by whether people live near a data center or don't, or know they live near a data center, I think is how we've done it. And then here, this was
plenty of granularity, which is always lacking. And always people, you know yourself, you pick the statistic that usually works for you.
Yeah, but the data set's there. So, I mean, the report in itself is really, highlights of that data, but there is a huge data set sitting underneath that, which I think has got all the granularity one could possibly imagine. And obviously there are always questions saying, oh, I wish I'd asked that. But that's, hindsight is always a accurate science, isn't it? But we know we've got some very, very useful feedback on this. In terms of what people really think. So this was interesting just in terms of how, I mean, from my perspective, having spent 10 years talking about data centers in the UK, and although we've been successful policymakers, we clearly haven't communicated this to general public because the UK has the lowest understanding of data center, what a data center definition, and considering that people were choosing a definition out of 5 options, 20% of people should have got it right anyway, just statistically. So 38% in the UK got it right. That's the pale blue who got the definition right, is quite low. And interestingly, only 32% in the UK of people connected data centers to digital services. And in view of the size of the digital services economy in the UK, that's a bit disappointing, particularly for me. But he did a much better job of that in Ireland, so that was reassuring. Interestingly, the age cohort who were least likely to connect the digital services they use in their phones to data centers were, Gary, I'm going to let you guess. Do you think which end of the age groups do you think it was?
Oh, I'd imagine people that are younger who don't even recognize there was a time before digital services. So I
Absolutely.
guess they get it.
Yeah, really surprising. I thought it'd be older people. It's not. It's younger people. The 16 to 24 age group were the least likely to associate the digital services they depend on every day with data centers.
I have 2 of them in my house, and there was never a time that this wasn't just the norm.
Yeah.
So I get that. I
Yeah.
get that
I think
all day long.
anyone who never had to use dial-up is, never going to understand how much we value Wi-Fi.
But can you make the sound of a modem? Can you actually make the sound of a modem? There's a
It's a kind of does sort of doesn't it, like
yeah.
that? Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's the mouse
Oh,
one. That's the one
yeah.
with the mouse. But yes,
Is
I
it?
get it.
Anyway, that's the one I used to use, and you could hear the little thing you're trilling away. Anyway, so community benefits that people associate with data centers. I thought there's some interesting ones here. There were community projects, investing in community projects, reusing brownfield. They bring value to local communities through faster internet. I thought that was a really interesting perception. Wasn't expecting that at all. They bring value through economic growth, yes, and they bring value through job opportunities, but that was the lowest. It's only just above 40%. So people were much more likely to think that the value data centers brought was in reusing brownfield or amenities rather than job opportunities. So again, that's something we've really got to work on. Then what worries people about data centers, on the other hand, and here again, there's a fairly standard split. I think nothing is way out. Energy use is highest. Visually unappealing, I thought was really interesting because it beat land use. I'd have thought land use would be more worrying to people in Europe. It was more worrying to people in the Netherlands for sure. So for them, land use was higher. But visually unappealing, I think, starts to matter hugely when you move data centers off industrial estates and into areas where their visual impact is going to be greater. And I think again we've got to be really careful about that. And also there's a lack of penetrability generally about a data center that it comes in an industrial zone. It comes to edge of site. There's a big fence. It's sort of grey anonymous building. So I can understand that, but I didn't think it would rate so highly. And then the other one that I was surprised about was electronic and toxic waste. And that demonstrates, I know, Gary, we were talking about this before, I think that demonstrates that we aren't communicating how the data center operates, because we run the infrastructure. So really that shouldn't be associated with much electronic and toxic waste. But people are obviously concerned about that. So we need, and many of our clients have completely closed loop, electronic recycling and reuse systems. So I think we need to do a much better job of communicating that. And then here was the positive negative divide. Just over half of people actually view data centers positively, 42% are neutral, and only 7% across Europe were negative. Interestingly, the most negative were the Netherlands and Ireland, but even then there were only 12% of people who were negative. In Ireland, 50% was positive, 38 was neutral, and 12 negative. I think that's quite encouraging. That I wasn't expecting to see figures that good.
It wouldn't, as you said at the outset, and we realize everybody has a role to play, including media, is that if you were to read the media and take a feel from it, you maybe would have reversed that. You would have said 50% are negative. 12. Interesting. Okay.
So I think that's good. And also this is, we've got something that we've actually asked people on a statistically robust basis, and that's actually quite nice to have, because so yeah, I'm very encouraged by those results. Then what would make you feel more positive? There's nothing particularly surprising here. Certainly high on the list was if they increase local job opportunities. We split this one by countries just as an example. And Ireland is very much local job opportunities if they added business to the local economy. And also if they provide amenities, I think was high. So it's amenities, jobs, and local economy. Again, it's that community dividend thing that we need to think about. People understand why data centers are important, but hang on a minute, why have I got to take the hit here? That's what people want to know. How can you make it better for me? And then really, I think pretty much on the last bit, but are people willing to have data centers in the community? And again, I was really surprised here. A couple of outliers. The blue is I am willing, the dark blue. The green is don't really mind. The red is I'm not willing. And the blue is not appropriate because either I've already got one or, so basically the blue is the interesting thing here, the dark blue. Ireland at 69% is pretty willing. People are pretty willing. I mean, many people must already have data centers close to them in Ireland, looking at the size of the sector. Netherlands was the outlying country here with only 38%, and that was driven down very much by the over 55 age demographic who were very negative. So they had a big impact. Younger people in the Netherlands were actually, I think, at around 67%, something like that, up with everybody else. So it was just a really interesting call out there. And then again, what would make you more willing to have a data center nearby? No surprises. The top three things were if I knew it would create economic growth for my local area, hiring local people for construction operations, and providing training and apprenticeship for local people. So it's all about, again, economic community dividend there. So very, very clear message coming from that, the top three. And that was across the board, very consistent. So just summing up, I think the implications, you may have other implications that you think of, Garry, but for me, the implications are we've got to do a better job of explain again. Our community engagement programs need to be driven by delivering local economic benefits. They have to be at the heart of what we do. And you'll see this coming out of the report more than I brought it out of the slides, but the commitments we make have to be realistic. You'll see in the report that about 25% of people were skeptical about whether amenities would ever be delivered. And I know that there's been problems in the UK because of the way that we might pay for something through what's called the Community Infrastructure Levy in the UK as part of a planning application. The council then could put that anywhere they wanted within the borough. So we might pay for a playground as requested by the local community, and then the council decide to put it 20 miles away. We've paid for it, the local community haven't got it, and they feel that we haven't delivered on our promises. So ring fencing those sort of commitments and making sure they're realistic and we can deliver them is really important. Then just the long term, I think, came out strongly in this, and I'm very pleased that, I've just seen one of our projects recently where we have a 25-year management plan for the amenities that we are making available to the community as part of the development. And I think that is, the longevity of these things must be linked to the asset life. And I think that's, we need to be doing that. And again, obviously, the community engagement must be bespoke. It must meet the needs of that community. But I don't think I'm telling you anything that you don't know, Garry. And then I'm a policy wonk, so I have to think about how this is going to impact my public policy dialogue.
Is that an official term? Wonk.
I don't know. I love the word wonk. It's kind of I don't know. I'll see if it's
we need
policy
to
wonk.
put that on your business card.
It's not on my business card. No. I've got a much better title on my business card. So we've got critically empirical, statistically robust findings. That's what we've got for the first time. We've got something that we know we can actually depend on, and in turn that helps us debunk myths and refute this kind of sensationalist coverage that seems to often be just shot from the hip. Or occasionally I've talked to journalists who've clearly already sold their story into the newspaper they're writing for, and then they're just trying to find the evidence to back that up, even if it isn't there. I have done that. I hate seeing that happen, but it does happen. And then also provide us with this, and others with a sound basis to inform, our community engagement. It's already proving invaluable in our dialogue with policymakers. It's obviously coincided with critical national infrastructure designation in the UK. So they're thinking, about how they communicate at government level as well. And again, just in terms of our industry community, this is something that, we obviously are contributing to the industry community, because public perception, it's very quick. One person can make you lose trust, but it takes everybody to build that trust and work together. So, the public perception from our perspective is always a collective effort.
Yeah.
So I think that is the end of me. I'm going to stop sharing, and then I can see you again, Garry, because I'm working blindly
Yeah.
here.
So
There.
interesting on a number of fronts. And we do have a few questions in, but I do have a few of my own. Ambiguity is a word that I immediately, there's ambiguity in the answers by geography and I guess that is the delta, isn't it, between the perception that you had in of the we, if
Yeah.
we is the community of centered designers, builders, and operators, and the end users, who also happen to be the people who you went out, because there's nobody in 2024, whether you're 94 or 4 months old, that hasn't got or using technology and
Yeah.
digital. So ambiguity is probably a word. Well, that's ambiguous. That's quite interesting.
Or perhaps marginally contradictory. I mean, there's some quite interesting ones, like young people were the least likely to understand what data centers were, what they did, the least likely to associate them with the digital services, yet actually among the most likely to be happy to have them in their communities. And
I do
previously we
think
thought lack of understanding would have undermined that, but with young people it hasn't.
I do think that goes back to human nature, to be frank. And I think
Mhm.
that my own mother taught me a thing. It's something that's there when you're born isn't technology.
Mm.
Something that's there when you're born. I mean, my mother often used to say, "What's the greatest piece of technology in your lifetime, Mum?" The tumble dryer, the double twin tumble dryer, right? So there's a bit of that as well. And I think it's to your point also, is that, they don't care
Mm.
once the service is on the device that they're using. So that is an interesting one nonetheless. Um, the other one that is an often is that a lot of people, and I would have loved to have got the answer to this question. Do you like the cloud any differently than you have a view on data centers? Because I would suggest that there are more people that if I say, what about having cloud services? They would be very, very, oh, yes, the cloud is great. That's software as a service. That's the app. But data centers, no.
No, because of course, people think that the cloud doesn't require an industrial scale infrastructure to support it, because it's ethereal. It's just the internet works by magic, doesn't it? Surely.
Well, there's somewhere in between the two. Words do matter more than we like to think. And of course, now, which is even probably more of a challenge, is we've decided in our wisdom to decide with all the comms and the data, we'll call it digital infrastructure. So now data centers are going to go down another peg in terms of, but these are words that people will, over time, will become more familiar with. 10 years, you mentioned, you've been saying pretty much the same thing in the UK. Tell them, and tell them again. Same perception, improved perception in your own experience to 10 years ago.
I think I need to distinguish here that my target audience was policymakers in the UK.
Right.
Rather than general public, because we as data center developers and operators was co-location, we aren't public facing. So we aren't, that's not what, we're so I've been, and I've always been working in policy. So those are really more, and also to some extent journalists, but certainly more policymakers. And I'd say we have an excellent, we've had, I have to say, policymakers in the UK are way, way better informed about data centers than they were 10 years ago. Whether that's me, I'm not going to claim, but certainly that certainly has worked. And the public, I don't think, was so much our target. I think and I do think the sector also talks in a bit of an echo chamber, and I'm sure I'm guilty of that as well. But I think it shows that we've got a lot of work to do with the public. But I do think we have made huge strides with policymakers, and they, I mean, a lot of that they've done themselves. But I would say that that's been and a lot of the explainers that you and I have, laughed over in the past, Garry, I know they've been used by policymakers, and I've used them time and time again for those kind of dialogues, and I know they have helped a lot there. So I think it's about who your audience is.
Sure.
Hasn't
And
our audience admittedly wasn't really general public, but it clearly needs to be.
and even looking at some of the questions, the level of ambiguity that is between the data and the center. We'll come to that in a moment. There's big divides, and you even said it yourself about, well, actually, we're the owner, we're the operator. We don't actually own the servers that are in the racks.
Yes.
So, when you get granular in this whole thing,
Mm.
the center owner is like the hotel owner.
Yeah.
He doesn't actually operate it often, even. So I think some of the questions are wonderful because they give even from an informed audience. So let me start with the bottom one, which was the numbers in the UK. Does it? This is from Rick Morris. Thank you, Rick.
Right.
Does this indicate apathy in the UK rather than not being aware of what a data center is? Interesting, because it comes on the back where there's been a surge of recent of data centers certainly been announced.
Yeah.
In the UK.
I think there is. I'm not sure I'd describe it as apathy. I think there's people don't see them as being particularly problematic, and even with power, they don't. It hasn't. People aren't generally concerned about the fact they're not going to be able to get power because data centers going to use it all up. That hasn't really. There's been the odd sort of sensationalist headline, and also one of the GLA reports was misinterpreted by the press on that. But other than that, we haven't seen that in a widespread basis. And also, until very recently, most data centers in the UK are brownfield and they're on industrial estates, and that means they are in keeping with the environment that you would associate anonymous grey buildings with, perhaps. So I think there doesn't seem to be. They haven't become emotive in the UK in the way they have become in other countries, for sure. And it
Okay.
also may be just because of the amount of, if you look at the UK generating capacity, data centers aren't impacting that in the way you can see them impacting in Ireland. Electricity demand in the UK has gone down year on year for the last 20 years. Now, there you can't argue that data centers are going to make us go and have to live in caves and eat bugs because they're use up the power, because it's not adding a top line. The issue in the UK is distribution. It's not capacity.
Agreed. And I think with regard to that particular point, when you are a country like Ireland that has grown and is dependent on foreign direct investment, you are always going to have these anomalies. Even with Guinness, if we were to actually take the percentage of water used for Guinness as a proportion of 5 million people, the chart would be huge because we make Guinness to export. I also had a discussion with somebody last week about the little blue pill, Viagra, that's made in Cork. I think there's 5 million of them made a week. So if you were to base that on the consumption of Ireland, then you can make your own. So you're always going to have this. And data centers, as you know, are digital factories.
Yeah.
Digital factories have raw material.
Yeah.
So I'd like to get into one thing interesting there was about the visual issue. A lot of people have a real problem. However, there's a huge drive to need to have these close to the things like district heating systems, local communities. So we're going to have to make a decision here. Do we want them in our community so we can take the off takes of the heat, or do we not? Because you can't have both.
No, you can't. I agree. I mean, but I do think there are things that can be done. I mean, we've always built data centers on very functional, on a very functional basis. And I think we could be a lot more creative in terms of design, in terms of architecture. You do see some very interesting data center designs. Data centers don't have to be ugly.
Yeah.
You don't have to have bad coffee in a data center. These things don't, they don't have to happen.
Honest to God, honest to God, I have never had good coffee in a data center, but there you go.
Oh,
I
I
mean,
have to say, I've had good coffee in a number of data centers.
ah,
So you've obviously been to the wrong ones, Gary.
I tell you what. Let's go on to one of the other
Mhm,
questions here. There's a couple of questions here about any understanding more complex subjects like data sovereignty, AI, workforce, and also I see one here: ownership for GDPR, etc., and disposition of personal data. One of the greatest challenges that the industry that is the center,
mhm,
we don't communicate, and it's probably outside of the mandate of a real estate investment trust,
mhm.
which
I'm not
is
sure we
that
are that actually. I think we're developer and operator. I
yeah,
think
but
the
there's a
bigger
big
ones are the REITs.
but there's a huge thank you for clarifying, but there's a massive
That's
difference.
correct.
There's a massive difference between the data
Mhm,
and the center.
mhm,
You're very much, and a lot of the people that get a lot of the flack are involved in the development of the center, closer to the
mhm.
facilities people than the actual servers that occupy it, or indeed the data that's on the racks.
Because we're the hotel, if you like. We're the perceived object. We are the physical manifestation of the internet, aren't we? The physical manifestation of the digital economy. You can't see the data, really, can you? So
Yeah.
I think it's being that we're the obvious part of it. So I think that's why we're the bit that's always the whipping boy, because we're the obvious thing to hate.
And my sense is, and this is one of my bugbears for a long time, is that we defend and the industry defends itself by being more entrenched into the facilities
Mhm,
aspect. Whereas in actual fact, what we have and you have in the UK and all over the world now, we have large retail complexes, don't we? With multiple brands.
mhm,
There's a developer of that retail complex, and then you've got tenants.
mhm.
It's like, in our case, blaming the developer of the complex on the bad service you're getting in Pennies or H&M or Hanley's. They're the tenants of this. The challenge this industry has is that those tenants love to call what they're using the cloud or SaaS as software and this and that and then the App Store because they don't want to connect it with the physical building, which is the center. So
Mm.
that's a big challenge internally, the data and the center. Because there's a lot of questions, and thank you so much to Emmanuel, to John. We'll get on to John in a minute, but and Rick, anything to do with data
Mhm.
is really not the
Outside my
demise.
bailiwick,
Yes,
Gary.
but I would be very challenged to find anyone who designs and builds and operates the physical manifestation of a center that lean into discussions because they're either co-locating, which is effectively taking people's on-premise servers and putting it into a centralized location, or you're a cloud platform. So you're keeping the reign off somebody else's servers that holds the data, correct?
Yeah. And what I mean, what we're all we can comment on or try to make better are things that are within our control. So our job is to essentially develop data centers in a way that is meets local expectations in terms of the people who have to host them. We have to accept, and I often talk about this. There has to be when we're large developers. These are large infrastructure projects. We have to accept there must be a social contract between us and the people who host us, and therefore, and there are only certain things that are within our control for that, and that's what this research is concentrated on, what we can do better, or what we are already doing slightly better than we thought possibly, and what people really think.
I
And
fully agree.
host communities, they're what they're saying is even the host communities where people where people understand what data centers are for and they understand the value of it, they understand the value to economy. As I said earlier, they said, well, hang on a minute, why do they all have to be here? Why do we have to host them? I'm worried about lack of diversity of future employment. I'm worried about aesthetics. I'm worried about lack of penetrability to site because I can't cut across the corner to go to school. Those are the things, and those are things that are within our control to address. And on the other hand, we we want them to accept that, their lives are indeed, we provide the physical, the internet doesn't run by magic, and we provide that physical infrastructure that allows them to do all the things they want to do. So it's a two-way street. But I think
Yeah.
particularly that has to be the benefits, or you call it, I call it the community dividend, has to be developed, has to be delivered at the local level, because they're the people who are hosting it. They're where the, whatever, what do you call it, the tire meets the road, or whatever you call it. There must be a phrase
Yeah.
for that, mustn't there? You'd
Isn't
know
it
better than me.
interesting?
But we
Isn't
can't,
that?
we can only do the things that are within our control. And
And
how data is managed, or GDPR and those sorts of things, yes, those things, and where AI workloads are going to be placed, they impact us in that we've then got to find locations, and land, and sort of planning, and get big projects through in those locations. But those, it's about the actual delivery of the physical infrastructure that is essentially, we're limited to that, I think, within this.
so I go back to what I have been saying for many, many years, is that there's two words in data center.
Mhm,
One is the why, and the other is the what. The data is the why.
mhm,
The data is the app stores, on-premise stuff move, the AI stuff. The centers are a bit like sending out, and I don't think there's any other industry right now or in the past that have sent out the facilities and property people to do the bidding like this industry has. So let's go back. There's a question in here which I like, from John Lee, actually, all the way in New York, because I know where John is. What anti-data center messaging has resonated the most in your experience, and how should it be addressed?
oh, that's what's annoyed me the most. That's really interesting. Actually, I could probably show you a couple of rebuttals. I think one of them that has always really annoyed me is things. I remember there was a couple of pieces a while ago on, does streaming hide a dirty secret, or something like that. And both certainly one of the big sort of exposes on streaming and the energy use for streaming. Not only was it completely wrong, like a car park, wrong on every level, but also it was a streamed program, streamed on HD by a
Right,
channel that said we are the biggest streamers. And I think it's the thing that really bugs me is the hypocrisy of people attacking data centers for energy use, and then profligately using the services that they get free at the point of use as a result of being a consumer of that. So I think those are the things that really bug me. Those kind of criticisms, where the criticism is about the medium for delivering criticism. I know it's not going to be effective to deliver your criticism by carrier pigeon any longer, but there is a sense that there's no sense that they are seeing the irony of that. And I think that does bug me. I don't know if that answers your question,
but
but
does this
you can tell it really annoyed me at the time.
but does this data now give you any reasons to lean into why that might be? As in, if a large, I can't recall the exact percentage, but if a 50% percentage don't actually connect their digital life to the center in their country, in their continent, wherever, then it's no surprise that you would
Exactly.
have that hypocrisy, as you say, right? So let's be okay with that with one regard, you know, and that's actually the opportunity to communicate. I think what you're saying is that, and this is often a challenge, is just because it's written
Mhm.
doesn't mean it's fact,
No,
either side. And
no.
just because you pick something very emotive,
Mhm.
if it bleeds, it'll lead. That's been the way since forever.
Yep.
And I think, to John's point there, I just think that ill informed, pick a statistic. It's nearly I have seen it in Ireland, I see it in the US last week. It's nearly often used as a look there, not here.
Mhm.
Nobody
Yeah.
knows about the centers. Nobody knows really about digital infrastructure. They do or they don't. But we have a problem somewhere else. Let's just deflect to them because we need to protect our. There's a lot of that going on. And also, to your point, and I think it's in the report, this is the absolute center of the apex of change. a massive change. Digitalization is a massive change. And change has never been globally, regionally, locally accepted as a good thing anyway.
Mhm.
Whether it was electrification, whether it was datafication. So it's always going to be in the headlights. But I do like that question from John, because I think
Mm.
that also depends on region. Rick is very busy, so I'm going to try and make head nor tail of a number of
And I'm going to
posts
try and
here.
find the piece that I think I will post in the chat about why we mythologize about data centers. Let me have a look for that.
Yeah, so let me just look and see. Can I?
Mhm.
Rick is asking numbers of questions. And understanding more complex subjects like data sovereignty, etc. Not really, because that's the data, and this particular uh, report is about the physical manifestation of the center. And it is a challenge for the industry to distinguish, no question, because the people who own the data or the platforms, etc., are terribly quiet always. That's the truth. At the top here, Rick, the data center is a positive facilitator of data sovereignty. Is it? To use the example, there are no local engineering jobs, manufacturing, retail without someone building the local enterprise park. Okay. Okay. I'm not 100% sure, but I think certainly in Ireland, anyway, what the foreign direct investment, of which this is part of over the last 40 years, has given people a confidence, a set of skills. So the reason why we're exporting so many skills and services around Europe, which you commented on recently to me, is because they learned in Intel. And before that, they learned at DEC and places like that.
Mhm.
So I think the comment that's being made, and it's probably right, is that the skills and services will also go where the opportunity is. That's the reality. So there's some other, on another platform here on my left hand side, I see some other activity.
I've just posted in the link, but I can't work out how to post in the main chat. So I've posted it in the background chat. I've posted the link to a thing called the Viking Helmet, which is all about myth busting in terms of data centers. I can post it later if you want to follow up with it, if the link doesn't work. But
Okay, I
um,
see that there.
yeah, that's
Well,
called the Viking Helmet, and it's about why people seem to be incentivized to talk rubbish about data centers.
I think
I did it a few years ago. It's at Tech UK. It's on their website, so it's public domain.
again, there's so much work and so much ambiguity and so much internal challenges of the data and the center industry to still. But I think also, and we've got a few more minutes to discuss this. You need a baseline, and what I see in this report, if we can go back to your report, is an initial term of reference,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is
Yeah.
so. What I really, really encourage both you and your colleagues is, let's come back and do it again
Mhm.
in X number of years
Mhm.
to see if progress has
Yeah.
been made.
Yeah.
Because often you throw these things up and, well, that's great, but was it better or worse
Mhm.
5 years ago or
Yeah.
3 years ago? And I guess
Exactly.
that's also what you're encouraged by.
Yes, I'm encouraged by that, and also the fact that it's particularly that headline that most people are okay about data centers. Most people actually like data centers, and only what 7% overall dislike them. Well, that's a bit like that sort of it takes the sort of anxiety out of it some ways because I mean, what proportion of people don't like cheese? Is that 7%? It's probably not that far off, is it? Do you see what I mean? So it's basically, well, data centers, most people like cheese. A lot of people are okay about cheese. A few people don't like cheese. You know, it becomes, it stops being so emotive. Do you see what I mean?
But I
It's
think that
natural that
also,
some people don't like cheese, isn't it? Do you see? So therefore,
I agree, but I think it's the same with everything in life. I support a soccer team,
mhm,
and I'd say 99% of the people are happy with the product, and 1% aren't. Who are the loudest? Who are the people who seem to
yeah,
get more listened to?
exactly.
It's
So the
human
vocal
nature.
minority, yeah, the vocal minority is not perhaps entirely representing the views of the quieter majority. I think that's fair to
Now,
say.
and I think this is what this report and our discussion here is helping, is you have a choice. You can ignore them
Mhm.
or you can engage. And the latter is way, way better.
Yeah.
But you can engage, which I think what we're saying,
Mhm.
with some informed analysis, backup, and robust data now.
Yeah.
And with that, I have another question that's come in
Oh,
from
oh,
Carl. Um, Within Ireland, there's some understanding of the need for DCs, but the frustration lies with the government for its lack of investment in the power infrastructure of the past 10 to 15 years.
yeah.
100%. 100,
It's not
100.
just Ireland. It's not just Ireland.
And that,
Um, where
exactly what,
lack of
what
foresight in energy planning and provisioning.
I,
Yeah,
I,
and
I, I,
I've had exactly the same frustration in the UK.
I think ultimately, when it comes down to it, though, also is that there is an industrial age shift. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to transpose a digital infrastructure growth on top of a previous digital infrastructure age infrastructure.
Wow,
And
that's getting philosophical, Garry.
again, shifts have changed. We're in about the fifth industrial age now,
Mhm.
where the insights from data is like the steam that drive the piston in the first one.
Yeah.
And as we all know, steam had its day and then it became automotion. We didn't take this train, we didn't try and run the cars on top of the railway tracks. We built roads. We built roads. It took
Yeah.
us a while.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of people who were just saying trains, 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 because they had embedded, same in oil, same in everything. It's just human nature. It'll take us a while.
Mhm.
But I think the point that's been made there by the question is the frustration is probably a great word, because in places of the ilk of Ireland where the only actual raw material, real raw material for a digital factory is green electrons.
Yeah.
That's the input stock.
Mhm.
That's the wool, flax, whatever one wants to call it. The Cisco router is the spinning jenny, and the data is what goes out and is uh, uh, um, monetized. It's the frustration of the simplicity of you have 10 times more generating capacity of that input stock than you could ever use. You
Mhm.
need to build a wire to these digital factories that monetize and export. Just get on with it.
Yeah. Just get on with it. I think just get on with it is spot on. Yes. Um,
And that
incredibly
differs, doesn't
frustrating.
it?
Yeah.
Then that differs between place to place. But yes, I agree wholeheartedly with that comment.
Mhm.
It's a
And
frustration.
interestingly, my colleague Mark pointed this out to me that if you actually look at per capita energy consumption, Ireland is very low still.
Well, there's a lot of discussions and reasons for that, such
Mm.
as home heating is very low, still a lot of oil and stuff.
Mhm.
But I think one of the talking about change and seeing as that question came in about the renewable energy,
Mhm.
um, and talking about instruments of change, there was a moratorium in 2006 in Ireland for wind farms, an
Is that
actual
on land though?
onshore moratorium. Now, when we look back, we say, what were you thinking? But it was to do with public perception.
Yeah.
It was to do with noise. It was to do with iteration. It was to do all these things. We're still at that stage. Now there's a general consensus in Ireland, general, that renewable energy is good. Wind
Yeah.
farms are good. There's community takeoff agreements and the community
Yeah.
benefits and stuff.
And that's
But
the key thing though, Gary, because that's the same. It's the same. Someone wants to put a great big piece of infrastructure in the field behind you. If they said, "Oh, by the way, your house will have free electricity now till this is taken down," your opinion about it might be different to if it's just some faceless company that's stuck it up and you have no benefit. So it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same thing with energy as it is with data centers.
and look, I'm a data guy. I'm not a center guy, but I had the same challenges when we were building out GSM networks.
Hmm.
Antenna. It's a reaction to infrastructure. Is I don't understand it, therefore I'm against it,
Hmm.
no matter how hard. And then you see the scale and
Yeah.
size.
Yeah. Or if I
So
do understand it, why do I have to have it here? I get it, but why's it got to be here? And
and
that's well, okay, let's see how we can broker this. Really, is
and
to
a
make it
start
fair.
and a great start, and we'll finish with this,
Mhm.
is by having robust data cross geography, that someone like you who actually enjoys analyzing these numbers and likes presenting it in such a way, is the industry 100% right? No. Are politicians 100% right? No. Are semi-states? No. But what we're finding now is a little bit like some of geographic political places at the moment is there seems to be a massive, you're either in that camp or you're in that camp.
It's got to be very
Mean
polarized. Yeah.
Polarized. Meanwhile, the world, the rest of the world, is getting on with it in the middle by using these two. So, Emma, unless you have any other, the questions are pretty much done. I'm happy enough that we are putting the link directly to the report plus the granularity into the respective feeds on the live show. Have you anything else that, if there's one sort of sentence you'd like to leave the listeners with, what is it right now?
I mean, I think the thing I'm pleased about is that we've actually got a robust basis to have those conversations with now, which we didn't have before. So that's what I'm really pleased about. Statistically robust data. It's not happened before. And the other thing I want to say is I'm sorry my balloon, which is always behind me, has somehow managed to impress itself through the background screen. I don't know how it's done that, but I always have a little balloon behind me and it's come through the background screen. Can you see it, Garry? It's hovering there in a kind of disembodied way. So if anyone was disturbed by that, I'm disturbed by it too, but I just want to set your mind at rest. That is in my room, and I don't know how it's made its way through the screen because it's at least 4 feet behind me.
It does remind me of
Oh.
Stephen King's It. The
Thanks,
balloon
Garry.
just kept appearing in different stages. So, last thing to say, we still have quite a few. There's a very diverse geographically and types of people that are on the call listening, and a lot of people listen after. People want to get in contact. The link that we shared has the relative links for people in journalism, in who may not like data centers and have problems with it to engage. This is the whole purpose of this document. Engage with you, engage with the people who authored it, and all that details in the link.
I will check. Certainly, or you can contact. I'm available on LinkedIn, or you can stick my email in the chat if you like, Garry. That's probably the quickest way on this. And just
Okay.
cough.
And there it is. The link is there. And I think with that, we'll say thank you to Emma. Thank you for listening. For those of you, it was good. The engagement was good. There was good questions. And have a great rest of your day. We're giving you 9 minutes of it back. So have a good day.
Brilliant.
Thanks a million,
Thank you.
everybody.